Hello everyone and welcome to this NQA webinar looking at the transition to 27001 2022. My name is Matt Barker. I am the InfoSec and Privacy Certification Manager here at NQA, and I'll be taking you through the next few slides. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. There is a question box, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it all in there. And if there's any technical issues, if you can't hear me, for example, or anything like that, or there's a slide that goes awry, then please please fire them into there, and we can pick it up as we go along. Okay, let's get started. So before we really get into the meat of it, I should probably tell you a little bit about NQA. So we are a world-leading certification body with operations across the globe. In the UK, we are in the top 3 for 9, 14, 45 and 27001. But as you can see from that slide there, we have a presence elsewhere, over in America and China specifically, but like I say, we do operate in most territories worldwide. If you are here today, then I suspect that your main motivation or interest is for 27001. But as you can see, we do operate in other standards as well. So quality there, 9001, environmental, 14,001, for example. I won't go through them all, but just to kind of give you a flavour of what else we have on offer there as well. And it's not just certification that we offer. So we do training as well. All of our training is accredited by our training partner, IRCA, and they take the form of either virtual learning, e-learnings, in-house training. We can also offer public training, and that can be rolled out anywhere nationwide. And that learning consists of, could be e-learning, could be introduction courses, implementation courses. We also do internal auditor and lead auditor training as well. And as you can see, there's a variety of length for them as well. But let's talk about 27001. So the first time we see a standard that's kind of linked to it is back in 1995 with the introduction of BS 7799. And that gets an update in 2000. We only really start to see 27001 as we know and love it in 2005, and we see its first appearance there. And that got its second update in 2013. Now, after that, there have been a series of additional or bolt-on standards that go with it as well. So in 2015, we see 2717 come into play, which is basically a code of practice for information security controls based on cloud services. And then a few years later, we see 2718 come on the scene. And again, that's a code of practice for the protection of personally identifiable information. Again, those two are both kind of concentrating on the cloud. Also in 2019, 27701, or PIMS, as it's more lovingly known, is introduced. That itself is a management system that looks at privacy in particular. Now, jumping ahead a couple of years, we get to 2022, and the reason that we're here today. So this is the latest update to 27001 and also to 27002, which is an accompanying document as well. Now that came into play at the end of October, or it was published at the end of October 2022. And from that period, we have a 3-year transition period, which takes us up to the end of October in 2025, which is where we find ourselves at the moment, and that brings us up to date. So a little bit about 27001 2022. It brings significant updates to information security management, which is essentially aimed at aligning the evolving digital landscape and strengthening defences against cybersecurity threats. These updates reflect a more streamlined and risk-focused approach, including substantial changes to the Annex A control structure. And what I mean by that is that the 14 control domains from ISO 27001:2013 have been reorganized into 4 key categories, which are organization, people, physical, and technological controls. We'll have a little look at them in more detail later on. But there's also 11 new controls that have been added. And these cover critical areas like threat intelligence, secure coding, and cloud security. I mean, the reason they've done this is obviously to reflect the heightened security demands of the time. But yeah, there's been a number of changes, and they're all fairly positive. The number of Annex A controls has been streamlined as well. That now stands at 93, which was compared to 114 in the previous edition. So for organisations preparing to transition, these structural changes will require a careful review and adjustment of their ISMS. So I spoke a little bit in that last slide about the changing landscape and what does that look like in practice. So kind of pre 2013, you know, I won't go through them all, but kind of the big buzzwords at the time were hacktivism, script kiddies, web defacement, malware, spyware. You know, obviously some are still relevant, but in 2022, you know, there's new threats as well. There's the high value data theft. There's ransomware. Organized criminal gangs are more prevalent, as is, you know, state sponsored crime. And a lot of those phishing attacks, cryptojacking, for example, are a lot more sophisticated as well. So that's why we see these updates, you know, periodically to make sure that that what is out there is still relevant. So there's been a series of notable changes to some of the clauses. 4.2, understanding the needs and expectation of interested parties, for example. Again, I won't go through all of these, but this is kind of where you would see the main changes, and we'll look at this in a little bit as well in further detail. So we also spoke about how they've been grouped into 4 key areas. I'll look at that a little bit more in detail now. So organisation was the first one. And the reason behind this is essentially to ensure organisational governance / the framework is in place and exercised to identify, assess and continually protect you know, our assets. The next section is people. So there is no substitute for a security aware workforce. And also to note that insider threat is real, accidental, coerced, or deliberate. Physical is the third group. Really, it's about the need to understand assets, the risk associated with them, and protect you know, those assets using layered controls. And finally, technology, where the focus on implementation of automated or rules-based controls is to complement the previous control groups. Now, in 3 of those groups, we see some new controls. Again, I won't go through all of them one by one, but to pick out a few beauties, we see 5.7 threat intelligence, 5.23 information security for use of cloud services, something that's becoming more and more prevalent. I mentioned earlier we've got 2717 and 2718, which look at them specifically as well. 7.4 physical security monitoring. And then moving into the technical controls, we've got 8.11 data masking, 8.23 web filtering, which seems to be the kind of the main buzzwords that we hear talked about a lot at the moment as well. So how can NQA help you transition to the new version of the standard? Well, essentially, we have produced a gap analysis tool. This is available on our website. Must be completed by the company prior to the audit, and it is split into 2 sections basically. So part 1 is new concepts. So this highlights the new concepts introduced in the new version of the standard and the related clauses, processes, and functional activities. And part 2, which is the requirements. So in there, we highlight the amended clauses, the processes, and the functional activities between the old and the new version as well. So I've put this slide on just to kind of give everybody an idea of what that would look like in practice. But we'll look at that in a little bit more detail as well. So for example, it's split into sections such as this. So the new requirement is listed on the left-hand side. So information security objectives are to be monitored. That's clause 6.2D. And we've suggested an activity there as well for how that can be assessed. So have you established how information security objectives are to be monitored and whom should be responsible for this? And my next slide gives a little bit more information on how that's completed as well, but we'll look at the two on here to start with. And then another new requirement is changes to the ISMS and how they're to be planned. So we've suggested that that you need to establish a process for managing these changes. Is that in place, and how are these changes authorized? So you can see a tick there. That bit is to be completed by the assessor when they come in. They have to do an initial day to go through the gap analysis. So they spend this time going through clause by clause to make sure that they've been met. And the box on the left-hand side of that is an example of what could be completed by a client to show that they've met the clause indicated. So the evidence of compliance for the information security objectives are to be monitored. We've put KPIs relating to objectives are captured monthly. The ISMS manager collects the information, reports to the C-suite monthly. See monthly PowerPoint slides. So that's the evidence that the auditor would go in and look at. And changes to the ISMS are to be planned. What have they done in this situation? Any changes to the ISMS must be approved by the senior process owner. Changes are recorded in our change management log. So that's what's been done. The auditor's looked at that change management log, happy with what he's seen, and has therefore ticked yes on that section. Again, this is just part 2, requirements set out in exactly the same format. So it's about the clause. If there's been a change, that hasn't in this particular case, but we give an example of what would need to be looked at, and then you've got the section to complete below. I just had a question there, which I will endeavour to answer now. It says, does the company receive a copy of the completed NQA gap tool? So the company would fill it out themselves, and then they would the auditor would go in, they would look at it and sign it off. It's a blank one that's available on our website, so they can just go on there and download that. So it is available. Yeah, lovely. Okay, so we spoke about 27,000. There's also 27,002, which is an accompanying document which gives advice on implementation. Now, it's not like for like, but as close as we can do it, we can map it to the new version of that as well. You can see a screenshot of what we've got here, which is how we've put this together. It's just a useful reference tool, really, if you wanted to look at kind of where something was in the old standard and where it is in the new standard. That's on the website as well, so that can be looked at. And just a few words on the timeline as well. So back in October 2022 is when the standard was first published. So that's when the clock starts ticking, essentially. Moving on, we've got some kind of key dates there along the way. So May 2023, NQA would have to book all recertification audits as transitions at that point. May 2025, we're suggesting that all remaining transition audits should be completed. Although it ends in October, we do suggest that you do get those booked in as early as possible, mainly because we don't want anyone to have any issue with their certification. It could be that findings are raised, you want to get your your caps in, you want to get that closed down as well. You want to get the dates that you want in there as well. So we're suggesting everyone does that as early as possible. And then we've got until the end of October. That's when the standard dies and everyone has to be onto the new version. So this was from the previous one that we did, and it's still relevant, but not so much as now. But it's just to let everybody know that you can transition on either a surveillance or a recertification audit. Certification will be granted for 27001-2022 in alignment with your existing cycle. And any transition at surveillance, the previous valid until date will be maintained. And if you had the clients who have had their 27001 VUD restricted to less than 3 years due to the transition period, i.e. if you had your recertification audit that you would think in theory would go past the 31st October 2025, it will do once you've transitioned. A couple of little points on the management review and internal audits. So management reviews and internal audits should be conducted to the new requirements of 27001-2022. As a minimum, clients must have completed a formal gap analysis using the document mentioned and reviewed the output with top management and the management review or an equivalent mechanism. And completion of the NQA 20001-2022 gap analysis form is mandatory. So to help with the transition, as I mentioned before, we do have a range of tools. So we have the gap analysis tool, which, as I say, is on the website and can be downloaded. It does need to be filled in and completed for the transition audit. We've also got a series of these webinars, which will run every month up until nearer the time, and they're interactive. So we've got these options to have Q&As going on as well. The marketing team have been great with regards to the output that they've done. They've put out various blogs and news articles on the transition, which are, again, they're out there. We send a monthly In Touch newsletter, which features all of that information. And we also have training courses. So if you have an internal candidate that is looking for kind of more knowledge on the subject and would like to really kind of work towards having a seamless transition, then that could be of use as well. Perfect. Okay, so that's it from me. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Okay. Perfect. I'll leave it there. Have a lovely afternoon, everybody. Take care. Goodbye.